So with this oven, as with the large masonry heater in the kitchen, the idea here is that you have a very fast burning and hot fire, and the hotter the fire is, the more effective it is, the more of the various gases emitted by the wood will be ignited. The smoke will also burn, and this will all add to the efficiency. And then after this rapid fire, instead of just letting it through the chimney, it will be caught in the great mass of stone here. Fire goes up to the top here, then it goes out on the back, down into one side, up, down the other side, up, and then out to the back here. So the smoke and the fire travels throughout the whole construction here and emits heat, which is then caught here and then slowly, you might say, emitted during the following more or less 24 hours. You will feel the heat of it for well, 12, 14, 16 hours, and but it will kind of have, there will still be some heat inside which you won't notice, but which will help the next fire along. Well, to build a fire in this oven, I will take typically 3 pieces of firewood, and that will be all that will be consumed. And you can do this once a day. You should take note that it will be from you ignite the fire and until you actually have some benefit of the produced heat. Of course, there will be a certain radiation of heat from the window here closing the oven, but the whole stone construction won't become really emitting heat until a couple of hours after you start up. So you should take account of that in your calculation. You would do this in the morning if you're spending time in the house during the day, or in the late afternoon, early evening, and that would suffice. So as you can see, I've now built a small gap here between these 2 pieces, and then I take one fire igniter here, and I have these I like because they're quite slim, so they'll fit in between the wood. And that's one of the benefits of these masonry heaters, is that they are always warm when you fire regularly, and that guarantees a nice draft in the chimney. So they're there. Well, now the 3rd piece, and these are actually 3 quite nice large pieces, so this is more than enough. Actually, could have been a bit smaller, these pieces, but certainly this is enough. And now the trick is to put the wood in such a way that it will more or less enclose the fire. You should try to imagine making it as difficult for the fire to get out as it can, and always ignite at the top of the stack, because that's actually by far the best way to do it. Then it will only burn from up and towards the down, and then every gas emitted from the wood will go through the fire, which is the benefit. So now you can close it up here, and there are these 2 holes here. It has to be open, of course, and should certainly stay open. It's quite small inlet here, but it works beautifully. So according to when it takes off, the fire will sometimes comes right away, sometimes it takes a little bit more time, and then it will burn quite furiously, and so it might last anything from an hour to an hour and a half normally, and that's it. And then you close the shutter down here in order for it not to continue sucking out air and hot air from the room into the chimney for no good reason. So the heat will then have comprised in the construction here, or will be gathered in here in all this stone. The fire has been coming along just for a few minutes while I made the previous recording here. So let's just see how it's getting on. Closing it, opening it carefully, and there you go. It's still in the heating up phase, so it's not come very long yet. It's only been a few minutes, so it'll certainly be here soon enough. There's a little bit humidity in the wood I can feel, so I had to dry some of that out as well. That's firewood for you. It'll, even though this is several years old, according to if it's not been inside for a long time, it'll of course have the humidity of the outside will to some extent be reflected in the firewood, even though it is well stored. So yeah, as you can see, as soon as I close, the concentration of the draft through the holes here will spur the fire. We'll see in a few minutes. Now this is the large masonry heater here in the kitchen, and I'm going to give you some instructions as to how to operate this that are quite important. First of all, you should be aware of the basic principle is that you have here the principal fire chamber, the fire box in here, and I'll show you how to stack it here in a few minutes. And then you have the secondary up here, which is like an oven, and the fire passes from here through here, comes to the back of the oven, and then goes up here in the front. The fire moves up into a space in the top here, and then it moves down on both sides and actually leaves the oven at the bottom here, goes into the funnel over here, the chimney. So first of all, you should be aware that if the oven is cold, if it hasn't been fired for a couple of days, it will eventually go cold. When it's fired regularly, typically once a day, it will remain warm at all times. It will, after having been fired, it will retain heat up till 36-40 hours. So if you fire once a day, that should be sufficient to keep it up and going. When the fire is on, it will burn for an hour and a half perhaps, and it will become quite hot right outside here. So if you are operating the stove here and you want to work here cooking, then you should be aware that that may actually become too hot for you working just close to the firebox here. You may have the fire at any time during the day or night for that matter. That's not so important. The idea is that you have a very efficient fire at high temperature where all the gases emitted from the firewood will be burned at very high temperatures up to about 800-900 degrees. It means that when it works as intended, no smoke will be seen leaving the chimney, even though you have a roaring fire going on here. So everything is burned, and that's why it's relatively environmentally friendly, since no gases are emitted, everything is burned. And then you have this high temperature burning very effectively, and then you have in the center here you have a concrete core, and then outside you have bricks, and altogether it's perhaps a couple of tons of bricks and concrete, and the heat will be retained in this and then it will be emitted during the subsequent hours. And now I'll show you how to stack it if and when the oven is cold. So when it's cold, you'll make a relatively small fire in the beginning in order to have not have the oven stress too much. If it is completely cold and you make a larger fire in here, the oven may suffer damage and crack inside. You can see there are some cracks here from that kind of operation. So you should be careful if the oven is cold not to load it up too much, and I'll show you how. And normally if it's like now, it's relatively cold. It's just about a few degrees plus in the daytime, and just a little bit freezing in the night time, and then just a relatively small fire once a day will be sufficient. First of all, it is quite important that all the shutters to the oven are open and closed as they should be according to what's going on. So when you're going to ignite the oven, you open all the shutters, and once the fire is over, you shut them all. And altogether there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 shutters actually. So one is at the top here, to the right it's open, and you may dampen it, but just open it fully, no problem. To the lower here, end of the, here also this door is open, so you have a kind of a flush of cold air going downstream here on the inside of the glass and into the fire. Then you have the primary air support from the bottom. Here is to the ashes will drop down here, and you will open this slightly to take in air below the firebox. Then there is in here, behind here, there is a shutter which is actually the shutter for the chimney. This closes off between the oven and the chimney, so of course it has to be open when the fire is on. But once the fire is over, it's important that this one is closed again in order to retain the heat inside the oven. So when this handle here is upright, it is closed, and when it is closed down like this, then it is open. It's kind of a shutter which stands up, and then it falls down like this and allows the smoke to pass through into the chimney. Closed, open. Finally, outside here in the next room actually, there is a small shutter here which you can open and should open during firing, as it will give some air to the backside of the firebox, adding to the efficiency of the fire. So 1 here, 2 and 3 on 2 and 3 here on the firebox, 4 the bottom inlet here, and 5 the shutter for the chimney. So now we're going to load it. Now I've picked up a couple of logs here, relatively short ones if you can find them, to cover the bottom here. As you can see, it goes down the slope here, and there's a grid in the bottom where the air goes in and the ashes go out. And the principle of building the fire is really to shut off the air coming from below as much as possible. So here now they are relatively closing the gap here, and this is the basis of the fire. I will then, already at this point, if the oven is already hot and I want to have a larger fire, then I can build a second layer before I start the fire. But the basic principle really is to ignite the fire as close to the top of the fire as possible. Normally, of course, many people assume that you lit the fire on the bottom, but it's much more effective to lit it at the top, because then all the gases emitted by the wood will have to pass through the fire. So I have the fire starter in there, and I'll just try to ignite it here. There you go. These are quite easy to get started. And then I will try to enclose the fire further in the second layer here, as you can see. And now I have 4 pieces in there, and I think I'll just have a 5th one on top, and that'll be it then for a nice square one here, which will go on top. And you can see here the oven is the oven was cold yesterday, and I made a fire like this, and it's still quite warm here 24 hours later. So now, as soon as I close it, you will see how the suction of the oven is very effective since it is already warm. If it is cold, there may be not altogether the same suction, but it'll build up soon enough. But this is actually enough for the cold oven. You may start also regularly like this, and then when it's burned to, when it's only some tinders left, then you can put in 2 or 3 logs more if you want furthermore. But for the first time, if it's cold, only like this, and then you may refire it 6 or 8 hours later. Otherwise, I'll fire today. You see already how it picks up here because of the heat will suck air in through the system right away, and this will be enough to keep it heated for the next 24 hours. Now the fire has been going on for a little more than half an hour, and it's still well underway. So I'll just give you a close-up. There you go. Quite hot. Close it back up, and you can hear the fire is picking up again here. So we'll leave it for another 20-30 minutes, and most probably it'll be done by then. Now just 10-15 minutes later actually, and most of the fire is done. But I'm going to refuel here. As I said, you shouldn't do this if the oven is cold when you start off, but it wasn't in this case, so I'm just going to demonstrate what happens when you reload. You see only some tinders now, so I will put in a couple of logs here. Again, I will attempt to block the air as much as possible. Close it off, and you will see what happens. Immediately almost there's a surge of fire here because of the build-up of the temperature and the high suction of the heat building up in the oven. Now firewood can be found outside here. It's stored in here into this shelf here next to the chimney and the oven, keeping it a little bit warm here at all times, which will help dry out the last bit of moisture in the wood. So you should take care to, whenever this is empty, you will fetch some new wood from the shed outside and preferably leave it here for a day before start using it. It's very important that you use very dry wood. It's quite essential to the efficiency of the fire. If for somehow this goes into some kind of disorder, if the oven is already warm, then you can stock some wood into the firebox of the oven and leave it there without igniting it for a few hours, and then ignite it later on. Then it'll have heated up and it will have emitted all the heat, and it'll burn nicely after that. So of course the wood has been dried for years already, but if it is a humid air outside, then also the wood will take in some of that humidity. So it's quite nice to have it left here for a day or more, and it'll certainly, you'll benefit from that. All right, now not much more than 10-15 minutes later, and now there's almost nothing left in here, just a few embers, and it's time to close up then. So we'll close up here, these two for the door of the firebox, close down the lower intake here, and I will close the back air intake out here in the next room. Close this one here, And finally, as the last one, I'll close the exit shutter to the chimney. And it doesn't close it completely, I should say. So even though there's a little bit left, that's okay. It can still pass air through onto the chimney, so even though there's still a little bit of fire and embers left here, that's not a problem. You should be aware of that even though during the fire here, of course, heat will come out from the firebox, it will still be a couple of hours, 1 or 2 hours, before actually the surface temperature of the oven will start to increase significantly. It takes that amount of time for the air to pass through to the outer layer here of the bricks. But then now it'll stay warm for easily the next 24 hours. It'll emit heat at a regular level all the time through, so, and it would go on even for more than 30 hours, 30 to 40 hours before it would be actually completely cold again. So normally, even though it's quite cold, one moderate fire here every day will suffice. If it becomes very cold, you can have perhaps 2 smaller fires every day, and that would give you a nice regular heat here. So, so much for the large masonry heater here in the kitchen room. Up here on the first floor we have this heating system here provided by this, what we would call a heat pump, and there's an outside unit as well. It is actually kind of the system you would have in a refrigerator as well. So what it does is actually that it tries to cool down the exterior, and then it emits the heat in here in this unit here. So just leave this running and no problem here. The heat pump is controlled here by a remote control. It's situated here at the staircase, this little thing here, and you can regulate the temperature here. So up and down normally it would just be on 18 or 19 degrees when if somebody's living up here. Otherwise I'll just keep it down on 16 degrees, which is the lowest setting, and it's enough to keep a nice environment up here.